You know that feeling when you're trying to understand something really big, really complex, and it feels like you're just peeling back layer after layer?
Yeah, trying to get to the core of it.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to try and get to the heart of it. We're taking a deep dive into Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike.
Right. A text that it really pulls together a fascinating mix of ideas, doesn't it?
It really does.
You've got Masonic symbolism, sure, but also concepts echoing ancient Egypt, Greece, the Mithraic mysteries.
Not to mention philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, plus a whole range of religious concepts thrown in.
Absolutely, it's quite the collection.
So, our goal here, our mission, if you like, is to pull out the key insights. We want to understand the symbolism, tap into that ancient wisdom.
And see what relevance it might still hold, for understanding ourselves, the world.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? When you encounter something so dense with symbols and history, what does it actually mean to be truly well informed?
That's a great question to start with. Where do you even begin?
Okay, let's try and unpack this. Let's start with a really fundamental concept: the lodge and the ladder.
Okay, so in Masonic tradition, the lodge itself is often described with these, vast dimensions. Its covering is symbolic, the celestial canopy, the heavens above.
Right, the whole universe, basically.
Exactly. And within that, you sometimes find this theological ladder. It draws on Jacob's vision from the Bible.
The one stretching up to heaven.
That's the one. And it's often presented with three main steps or rounds: faith, hope, and charity.
Faith, hope, charity. Sounds fairly straightforward. Trust, anticipation of an afterlife, goodwill.
That's the usual interpretation: trust in a higher power, hope for what's to come, and acting kindly towards others.
But, and here's where it gets interesting, our source material, Morals and Dogma, it actually critiques this view, doesn't it?
It does. It points out that this three-step ladder is, comparatively modern. It suggests it's kind of incongruous with older, perhaps deeper understanding.
Okay, so what's the older version then?
Well, the text really emphasizes how ancient cultures often thought in terms of seven classical planets: the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn.
The ones you can see without a telescope.
Precisely. And corresponding to those, you often find the idea of seven heavens or seven spheres that the soul had to traverse.
And we see this number 7 pop up elsewhere.
All over the place, according to the text. Mithraic monuments, for instance, often had 7 altars or pyres. Think of the 7 lamps on the menorah in the temple.
Ah, okay.
And historical figures support this. Clemens of Alexandria, Philo Judaeus, they both talk about this kind of planetary symbolism being significant.
So 7 carries some real symbolic weight here. What was the underlying idea? What did it represent?
The core ancient belief seems to be about the soul's journey. After descending into the material world, the soul had to ascend back through these same 7 planetary spheres to return to its origin, its source, maybe the infinite.
A return journey.
Exactly. Marsilius Ficinus, commenting on Plotinus, talks about this ascent having 7 distinct degrees or stages.
7 steps again.
Yes. And the Mithraic mysteries, which were quite widespread in the Roman Empire, they literally used a ladder with 7 rungs in their rites. It directly symbolized this planetary ascent.
Wow, a literal ladder. So it's a kind of spiritual journey mapped onto the cosmos.
That's a great way to put it, a spiritual progression through the known celestial order.
And Jacob's ladder, the biblical one, how does that fit in?
Well, the text connects it.
Yeah.
Jacob's vision had spirits going up and down, right, between earth and heaven with the deity above. It mirrors this idea of transit between realms.
Okay.
And then you have the Mithraic cave rituals. These caves, often representing the cosmos, had entrances aligned with the equinoxes and solstices.
The 4 key points of the sun's journey.
Right. And inside, they symbolize these 7 planetary spheres that souls pass through. 7 gates marks the passage, both coming down and going back up.
Yeah.
Celsus, quoted by Origen, even mentions this ladder, 7 gates, with an 8th at the very top representing the realm of the fixed stars.
The ultimate destination, perhaps.
Possibly. It's about moving through the known celestial order to reach something beyond, something ultimate.
It's really striking how this 7-stage idea appears across different cultures and times.
It is. The text even links it to the Pyramid of Borsippa near Babylon, which reportedly had 7 distinct colored stages.
Colored stages, like the planets.
Believed to represent the planets, yes. And it connects to the 7 degrees of Mithraic initiation itself, that ladder again. Even the lights used to understand the Masonic lodge, the source suggests, might relate to this idea of progressive illumination through stages.
Okay, fascinating stuff on the structure and the journey. Let's shift focus slightly. What about the principles this journey might lead to? Let's talk about morality and duty.
Right. So the text lays out several core tenets for personal conduct. It's not just about following rules, but about finding pleasure in doing good.
Pleasure in doing good. That's interesting, not just obligation.
Exactly. It emphasizes respecting the aged, protecting the young, actively opposing vice. The golden rule is central, naturally,
Treat others as you'd want to be treated.
of course. And also submitting to fortune, accepting what comes, but holding on to wisdom. It's about internal strength and ethical action.
It almost sounds like aligning your inner nature with good so it becomes pleasurable rather than just obeying external commands.
I think that's a fair reading. The text stresses that the absolute, the ideal, should be practical. Our ideals should nourish the mind, not just be abstract concepts.
And wisdom itself.
Wisdom is described as more than just knowledge. It's a sacred communion, something that can unite humanity for concerted positive action. In a way, it suggests philosophy, when lived, becomes religion.
And how does Masonry fit into these ongoing duties, according to the text?
Masonry is presented as having these eternal duties. Opposing tyranny and corruption is key, symbolized by figures like Caiaphas, Draco, Trimalcion, Tiberius, archetypes of misrule and decay.
So a constant vigilance against negative forces.
Yes. And then there are the three great tenets specifically mentioned for our Mason's profession: brotherly love, relief, and truth.
Okay, break those down.
Brotherly love is about kindness, affection, general goodwill. Relief is the duty to help those in distress, materially or otherwise. And truth is paramount, a divine attribute, the foundation of virtue, something to be constantly sought.
So these aren't just abstract ideals, they're meant to guide actual behavior.
Definitely. They're intended as practical guides for how one should live and interact with the world.
This idea of practical application leads us nicely into our next point: building the nation and the individual. How does the text connect these moral ideas to society?
It uses this powerful analogy of building a great monument of a nation, comparing it to constructing the holy house of the temple, a sacred collective effort.
A collective effort, so it's not just about individual morality.
No, it stresses that cardinal virtues like justice, prudence, fortitude, temperance shouldn't be exclusive to a select few. They should be shared by everyone. Everyone should be apprenticed, as it were, to duty and honor.
A society built on shared ethical foundations.
That's the idea. Masonry itself is framed as a march and a struggle toward the light.
And light here means
Light symbolizes virtue, manliness in the sense of strength of character, intelligence, and liberty. Crucially, this applies to both the individual and the nation.
and the opposite, darkness.
Tyranny. Tyranny over the soul. Tyranny over the body that's depicted as darkness.
The text offers some warnings too, right? Especially for republics.
Yes, quite stark warnings. It cautions that even republics can relapse into servitude. Often it suggests this happens through wars, which can arise from evil councils or entrusting power to unsuitable base individuals.
A danger of power corrupting, even in a free society.
Exactly. The text highlights historical examples of nations feeling their feet sliding backward, losing ground, necessitating a supreme effort to regain their principles.
History repeating itself?
It suggests that tendency. Past tyrants are presented as types or models for future ones. And it makes this sobering point that people and nations can willingly sell themselves into slavery just to gratify their passions or immediate desires.
Willingly give up freedom.
Often through the tyrant's plea, the argument of necessity, claiming extreme measures are needed for security or order. This, the text warns, can lead to the state controlling religion, suppressing individual belief, and ultimately claiming ownership over every aspect of life.
A stark warning about the fragility of liberty.
Very much so. It really underscores the need for constant vigilance.
This brings us to a perhaps more critical look at human nature and belief.
Yes, the text offers some, let's say, realistic observations. It advises against the cynical view that all men are hypocrites, suggesting true, systematic hypocrisy is actually rare.
Okay, so not everyone is pretending.
Apparently not universally, but it does argue that our stated creeds, whether religious or political, often have a surprisingly limited influence on our actual conduct.
What we say versus what we do.
Precisely. It makes a rather striking, maybe even controversial observation for its time, that in the Orient, a Mohammedan is often found to be more trustworthy in practice than a Christian.
Wow, that's quite a statement. What's the point it's making?
It seems to be highlighting the potential gap between professed belief and actual ethical behavior, regardless of the specific religion. It points out the contradiction of people who claim to believe in eternal damnation, yet easily succumb to simple temptations.
The inconsistency is the key.
Exactly. And it even turns this critical eye inward, towards Masonry itself. It notes the ideal of brotherhood sometimes clashes with the reality of preferring an unqualified non-Mason over a qualified Mason in worldly affairs.
A gap between principle and practice there too.
Yes. And it mentions the paradox of Masons taking oaths against usurpation, against illegitimate power grabs, yet sometimes becoming instruments for those very usurpers.
So it's urging a hard look at how beliefs actually translate or fail to translate into action.
I think that's right. It encourages looking beyond mere professions of faith or affiliation to understand true character.
It seems to be pushing for a deeper understanding, beyond the surface. Let's move on to the role of symbolism and truth in conveying these deeper ideas.
The text explains that ancient mystic shows, rituals, performances, they weren't meant to be simple lessons with clear answers. They're more like the opening of a problem.
Designed to provoke thought, not just provide answers.
Exactly. To awaken the intellect, to encourage research and reflection. They weren't seen as hostile to philosophy. Rather, philosophy was the tool needed to expound upon the symbolism.
So philosophy unlocks the symbols.
That's the idea. But there's a warning too. When a symbol, which is flexible and multi-layered, gets altered into a rigid dogma, a fixed belief,
It loses something.
it's fatal to beauty of expression, the text says. And worse, it often leads to intolerance. The fluidity is lost, and only one interpretation is deemed correct.
That makes sense. The openness is key.
Very much so. The text reflects on the ancient struggle to even describe the soul, often using metaphors like fire or light. And it asks, are we really any clearer today?
A humbling question.
It is. It suggests that maybe ancient errors, like specific ideas about where the soul lived or how it descended, weren't the main point. They might have been accessories to a greater truth, perhaps even allegories specifically designed for initiates to decode.
The literal details might not matter as much as the underlying message.
That seems to be the suggestion. It's about the deeper truth the symbols point towards.
Okay, shifting gears slightly again, let's look at the text's perspective on the Republican justice, particularly in the context of nations.
The text observes a recurring theme in history: the avarice of states, their hunger for commerce, for territory.
Which often leads to conflict.
Yes, leading to violations of treaties, rapacity, the exploitation of weaker neighbors. And it argues that republics are not immune to this. They can be just as unprincipled as despots when it comes to expansion.
So the form of government doesn't guarantee ethical foreign policy.
Apparently not, according to this view. Republics often fail to learn from history's warnings about the consequences of such actions.
It sounds quite critical of unchecked national ambition.
It is. It issues a stark warning. When a republic begins to plunder, its doom is essentially sealed. There's a sense of almost divine judgment on unrighteous national affairs.
A moral consequence for nations.
Yes, and for republics facing internal strife like civil war, the advice offered is to look inward, examine past injustices, humble themselves.
Take responsibility for past wrongs.
Exactly. And then it adds a crucial principle for preserving liberty.
Yeah.
A free state should not confer office, positions of power as a reward, especially not for dubious past services.
Why not?
Because appointments should be based solely on fitness for future service, on ability and integrity. Giving posts as rewards opens the door to corruption and incompetence.
That's a very strong stance against political patronage, isn't it?
Absolutely. The text even argues that without this rule, hereditary succession might almost be preferable, as it might at least occasionally place power in the hands of those with a strong innate sense of justice and moral courage.
That's a provocative comparison.
It is. It heavily criticizes flatterers of the people and the rise of unqualified individuals to leadership through political maneuvering and party tricks, highlighting the negative long-term impact this has on the health of the republic. Merit over manipulation is the core message for good governance.
Okay, let's move from the political realm to the most fundamental level, the divine and creation as presented in the text.
The text references Plato's somewhat enigmatic description of the first principle and the entities surrounding it. It interprets this through the lens of Kabbalistic theology, specifically the Sephiroth.
The Sephiroth again.
Yes, the king, in Plato's description, is equated with Ein Sof, the supreme, absolute, infinite being.
The ultimate source.
The ultimate source. From this center, reality emanates, unfolds in three manners and spheres. Particularly important is the divine world, Aziluth, where initially all things existed as a perfect unity within the divine.
A state of oneness before differentiation.
Exactly. But the text adds a really important clarification here.
What's that?
It stresses that this first principle, as it's manifested through creative thought, isn't the entirety of the unknowable, illimitable deity itself. It's more like a specific aspect or function.
Can you give an analogy?
The text uses Arkwright, the inventor of the spinning jenny. There's Arkwright, the inventor, the creative mind expressed in the invention. And then there's Arkwright, the whole person, beyond just that one role.
Okay, I see. The creative act versus the total being.
Precisely. The point is that our human grasp of God is infinitesimal compared to the totality of the wholeness of the divine. It's a profound statement about the limits of our comprehension.
Acknowledging the vast mystery. Now, how does Masonry, according to the text, attempt to put these grand ideas into practice?
Well, it translates these principles into ethical action. The text specifically mentions the ethical treatment of labor, condemning exploitation. It's about applying these high ideals in the real world.
Making philosophy practical.
Exactly. And it reiterates that Masonic symbols and ceremonies aren't superficial. They have multiple meanings, concealing truths that require reflection, contemplation to truly grasp.
They demand engagement from the individual.
Yes. Truth itself is described like a ray of light. It can be separated into different kinds. Masonry, the text claims, aims to teach all truths: moral, political, philosophical, and the essential principles of religion.
A very broad scope.
Extremely broad. And it leaves us with these evocative questions. Who has the Sphinx truly revealed its meaning to? Who really understands the symbolism of the pyramids? It highlights the depth of hidden wisdom these ancient symbols might hold.
Hints of knowledge still waiting to be fully understood. Let's consider how these principles might extend to civic life, looking at patriotism and progress.
The text suggests Masons can unite in what it calls patriotic labors of peace.
Labors of peace, what does that mean?
It means actively working together to prevent social evils, to reform problems within society. It's about constructive contribution, not just during wartime.
Active citizenship for the common good.
Precisely. And it emphasizes that everyone can contribute to this, no matter how small their role might seem, and everyone can share in the glory of such positive efforts.
Valuing every contribution.
Yes. It uses an analogy. Think of the famous names in history, the leaders. But behind them are thousands who prepared the way, who did the groundwork for change. The text highlights the reward and honor due to diligent, faithful labor, even in unseen positions.
Recognizing the unsung heroes.
Exactly. It even compares it to the honor given within a local community to even the meanest soldier who fought bravely in a significant battle. And it notes the lasting memory afforded to those who fall in the fight for progress, even if they aren't famous historical figures.
It's a call to value principled action and contribution at all levels. This leads us to the ideal of the good Mason and the vital principle of tolerance.
The text paints a picture of the good Mason as someone motivated by a love of duty and acting according to conscience. It's about embodying morality consistently across all spheres of life: individual, family, social, civic.
That holistic morality.
Yes. And true Masonry is defined quite profoundly here as eminent morality, which is philanthropy.
Philanthropy meaning love of humanity.
Exactly. Extending that love to all humankind, even including, as the text puts it, the evil among brethren, suggesting a deep capacity for forgiveness or understanding. It stresses a proactive desire to do good, to spread positive values.
An active force for good in the world.
That's the ideal. And a crucial consequence of this is stated very clearly. A true Mason cannot be a persecutor.
Cannot be a persecutor. Why is that so central?
Because the text argues that merely tolerating opposing religious opinions isn't enough. Tolerance, it suggests, often implies that you think the other person is wrong, that their belief is heresy, but you'll put up with it.
So tolerance can still carry a sense of superiority.
It can. Masonry, according to this text, goes further. It believes in the absolute sovereignty of individual belief. Your faith is your own business, entirely foreign to the judgment of others.
Complete freedom of conscience.
Yes. And logically, if any right to persecute existed, it would have to be mutual. Everyone would have the right to persecute everyone else, leading to chaos.
A recipe for disaster.
Indeed. So Masonry refers religious differences to God alone. It invites all who lead virtuous lives and believe in the one God, regardless of specific creed, into peace and harmony.
Finding common ground in ethics and monotheism.
Exactly. It describes the attributes of this God, all-powerful, all-wise, benevolent, and the universal law of harmony that governs existence. emphasizing the profound homage and gratitude owed to this divine source. It's about unity and diversity, grounded in shared fundamental beliefs and values.
This emphasis on doing good leads naturally to the value of beneficence and truth.
Right. The text actually quotes a Roman saying, "Men are closest to the deity when they are conferring benefits upon others."
Doing good brings us closer to the divine.
That's the idea. Serving others, doing good, is presented as the greatest fortune one can have, the expression of the finest human nature.
More valuable than personal gain.
Far more. It suggests that the true reward for benefactors of mankind might be looking down, perhaps from another state of existence, and seeing the blessings that resulted from their efforts. This is contrasted sharply with conquerors and self-serving leaders.
A legacy of positive impact versus a legacy of power.
Exactly. The potential fruits of benevolence are described beautifully: the triumph of knowledge and virtue, the exile of superstition and tyranny, and it reiterates that God values souls, not stations, loving all equally.
A very egalitarian view from a divine perspective.
It seems so. And then there's the focus on truth. Truth is called a divine attribute, the very foundation of virtue: frankness, reliability, integrity. These are its expressions.
And how is truthfulness tested?
The text says a Mason will not willingly deceive certain categories of people, as these represent the truest tests of justice: the dead, who cannot defend themselves; the absent, who are not present to speak; the innocent, who are vulnerable; and those who explicitly trust him.
Situations where deception is easiest, perhaps, but most dishonorable.
Precisely. It connects noble deeds throughout history to individuals of truth and courage, arguing that truthfulness makes one both virtuous and wise, the greatest safeguards one can possess.
Honesty is a source of strength and safety.
That's the core message. Integrity is presented not just as a moral good, but as a source of inner strength and wisdom.
Let's now consider the fundamental belief in God and the soul's journey that the text outlines as essential.
Okay, the text lays out certain core beliefs a Mason should ideally hold about God's nature.
Go shows.
A belief that God has a fatherly interest in us, that he provides us with the powers needed for redemption and growth, and that our ultimate destiny is one of endless progress toward perfection.
A very positive and purposeful view of existence.
It is, and the text argues that holding these beliefs enables a certain way of living, with calmness, patience, resoluteness, cheerful self-denial when necessary, steadfast hope, and ultimately, victory in life's struggles. It provides a foundation of meaning and strength.
And the alternative, denying these principles.
That, the text suggests, leads to despair and meaninglessness. Believing the universe is governed by blind chance, or an indifferent deity, or a vengeful God, or arbitrary will, or a fickle power, all these lead to a sense of hopelessness and purposelessness.
So, the nature of one's belief about the ultimate reality profoundly impacts one's life.
Profoundly. The text also speaks beautifully about this mighty thought within our frail human lives, this yearning for freedom, this sense that transcends our visible physical existence.
That innate spiritual longing.
Yes, the soul reaching outward, questioning its own nature. Are we just matter? Are we spirit trapped in matter? Are we an individual essence, or just a part of some great first principle?
The big questions about identity and existence.
Exactly. And this struggle to understand, the text acknowledges, often leads us into error, into vain philosophies, getting stuck in pure materialism, or lost in abstract concepts disconnected from reality. It's part of the human journey of seeking understanding.
This sense of seeking and questioning seems tied to the idea of mystery and wonder.
Very much so. The text basically says that everything should inspire admiration and wonder, both within us and in the world outside.
Everything, even mundane things.
Especially, perhaps. It points to the inherent mystery in the connection between mind and matter, how brain signals translate into thought and action, the power of will, movement itself, memory, dreams.
Things we experience every day but rarely stop to truly contemplate.
Precisely. And the incredible harmony that somehow emerges from all this complexity in the universe. Even our most familiar actions, the text suggests, play a part in the grand order of the universe.
It's fostering a sense of awe at the everyday.
Yes, and reminding us of our interconnectedness. We're linked to this boundless universe, linked to generations past and future. It's a call to appreciate the profound mystery of simply being.
Now, let's delve into how the text discusses conceptions of God and religion more broadly.
It makes an interesting point that our truest conception of deity is essentially the loftiest, noblest, most perfect character we can possibly imagine. Our highest ideal reflects our best understanding of the divine.
Our concept of God evolves with our own moral and intellectual understanding.
That seems to be the implication. However, it also offers a pragmatic, perhaps controversial observation about religion as it functions in society.
Which is?
That for religion to be influential with the masses, it often needs to incorporate elements of what higher reason might consider error. It has to simplify, perhaps anthropomorphize, to connect with a broad audience.
So there's a difference between philosophical truth and what works for popular religion.
The text draws that distinction. It talks about truth for the philosopher versus what has the effect of truth for the peasant or the common person. The religion of the many, it argues, is necessarily more incorrect in its outward form than that of the reflective few, even if the core spiritual idea is latent within it.
A potentially challenging idea.
It can be. It suggests the truest, most abstract form of religion might not be comprehensible or consoling or offer practical guidance to someone without significant education or reflection.
It even applies this to sacred texts like the Bible.
Yes, it suggests the Bible's doctrines aren't always presented in strict literal philosophical truth, but are often adapted, phrased in ways suited to convey practical essentials to a relatively rude or unsophisticated people in the context of their time.
Tailoring the message to the audience.
Exactly. A perfectly pure abstract faith, this text muses, might find too little preparation in the common mind for easy reception. It almost suggests that truth sometimes needed the wings of error, simpler, more relatable narratives to spread effectively.
That's a really thought-provoking take on the history of religious ideas. This brings us to the text's view on life, duty, and social progress. How should we approach this life?
Crucially, the text states that Masonry does not advocate an ascetic undervaluation of this life. It rejects the idea that we should scorn earthly existence, arguing that requires unnatural feelings.
So embracing this life is important.
Very. It criticizes the tendency to look only to a future life for compensation for social evils and injustices suffered here. That attitude, it argues, actually harms virtue and hinders social progress in the present.
How so?
Because if you believe all wrongs will be righted perfectly in the afterlife, you might become complacent about fixing problems now. Life is presented as real, earnest, full of duties, and significantly, as the beginning of immortality, not just a waiting room.
Our actions here matter for our ongoing journey.
Precisely. The text argues that those who truly care about this world will actively work for its betterment. Conversely, those overly focused on heaven may passively accept earthly miseries for themselves and others.
A potential downside to excessive otherworldliness.
Yes, it notes, rather sadly, that historically, those most given to spiritual contemplation have often been apathetic towards worldly improvement, sometimes even conservative forces resisting positive change. It's a call for balanced engagement, spiritual awareness, combined with practical action for good in this world.
Let's now look at some more specific symbolism. Symbolic mountains and towers.
The text discusses the symbolic mountain known as Meru, often depicted in mythology with 7 steps or stages.
7 again, connecting back to the planets and heavens.
Seems likely. And it suggests that man-made structures like pyramids and artificial mounds, often built in flat landscapes, were essentially imitations of these sacred mountains. They served as high places for worship.
Creating sacred space where none existed naturally.
Exactly. Pyramids, it notes, could be square or round-based. It details the sacred Babylonian tower, Magdal, as a pyramidal hill with 7 distinct colored stages, again representing the planetary spheres.
The colors reinforcing the planetary connection.
Yes. And Meru itself was sometimes depicted with 3 peaks,
Yeah.
symbolizing the Trimurti, or divine trinity. It also mentions pagodas with multiple stories and spires, and references historical accounts by Herodotus and Strabo about the immense temple of Baal at Babylon, described as a great tower, possibly 7 or 8 stages high, built like a pyramid.
A consistent architectural theme reflecting a cosmological understanding.
It appears so. Linking earthly structures to the perceived order of the heavens seems to have been a widespread practice.
This idea of layers of meaning brings them back to esoteric and exoteric doctrines.
Right, the ancient distinction between inner esoteric teachings meant for initiates and outer exoteric teachings for the general public. The text calls this distinction purely Masonic, tracing it back to figures like Orpheus and the ancient mysteries.
A tradition of hidden knowledge.
Yes. And it notes that after Alexander the Great's conquests spread Hellenic influence, Greek thinkers actively sought wisdom from various schools, Egypt, Asia, Thrace, leading to a synthesis of ideas.
And this concept appears in Jewish thought, too.
Specifically in the Jewish Greek school of Alexandria. Thinkers like Aristobulus and Philo developed theories attempting to show that profound truths found in Greek philosophy actually originated in Jewish scriptures, hidden beneath the literal text.
An attempt to claim primacy for their own tradition.
Perhaps partly. Aristobulus viewed the scriptures as allegories concealing deep meanings, which he believed Plato had borrowed. Philo had a similar theory, stating the literal meaning was for the vulgar, the uninitiated masses.
And how could one access the deeper meaning?
Through spiritual practice, meditation, self-purification, contemplation of the divine. Those who did this, Philo argued, could pierce the veil of the literal text and be initiated into the true mysteries. Historical facts, figures, words, rituals, all were seen as veils, interpretable only with the key of science, meaning a deeper allegorical understanding.
Different levels of truth for different levels of understanding. It seems central to many of these traditions. Let's move on to the text's description of ancient deities and emanations, specifically Amen.
Amen, originally a deity prominent in Lower Egypt, is presented here as representing the supreme God. He's called the celestial Lord who sheds light on hidden things.
A god associated with hidden knowledge.
Yes, and the source of divine life, symbolized by the crux and sata, the ankh, and power. He essentially unites the attributes of the Supreme Being as understood in ancient Oriental theosophy. He's described as the pleroma, the fullness of all things, and as the ultimate light, the sun god, unchangeable, with all other gods being merely emanations from him.
Emanations again, like rays from a central source.
Exactly. The text describes a ray of light from this deity as the fundamental cause and principle of all existence, embodying both father and mother aspects. From this dual force, represented sometimes by the Hebrew letters IHUH, related to the Tetragrammaton, emanates the firstborn of God.
The firstborn.
Yes, seen as the universal form or archetype of all things. This firstborn is the creative agent, the conservator, the animating principle, the light of light. It possesses inherent light, spirit, and life.
Both creative and sustaining power.
And it has a dual nature, the generative principle and the conceptive principle, sometimes called Adam Padman. This firstborn then reveals the divine nature through 10 further emanations, the Sephiroth.
Ah, the Sephiroth arise from this firstborn.
In this particular scheme, yes. And crucially, they are presented as attributes of God, not separate beings. Sovereignty, will, wisdom, intelligence, benignity, mercy, severity, justice, beauty, harmony, victory, glory, permanency, foundation, and empire kingdom. The underlying principle is that we can only grasp the invisible divine through its visible manifestations and attributes.
Understanding God through God's actions and qualities in the world. Let's shift to a discussion of the new law and reverence as presented in the text. What does this refer to?
The new law seems to refer to the core ethical teachings associated with Christianity, though presented here in a more universal philosophical light. It emphasizes God's goodness and love, his pervasive presence, the brotherhood of man, forgiveness, the soul's immortality, free will, and equality before God.
Universal ethical principles.
Yes, highlighting virtues like humility, meekness, gentleness, kindness. The text states that every true Knight of the Rose, a specific Masonic degree, reveres the memory of him who taught this law. It's about honoring the source of these profound ethical teachings.
Showing reverence for the teacher and the teaching. Now, how does the text define the role of the Grand Master of all symbolic lodges? This sounds like a central figure.
It's presented more as an ideal, perhaps embodied by the principles themselves. The text quotes the famous Hermetic axiom: what is superior is as that which is inferior, and what is below is as that which is above, to form the marvels of the unity.
As above, so below. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm.
Exactly. The true Mason, in this light, is defined as the practical philosopher. Someone who builds a moral edifice, a structure of knowledge based on observing nature and using reason, finding both duty and pleasure in its harmony and symmetry.
Building an inner temple of virtue and knowledge.
That's a great way to put it. The focus is on moral improvement and beneficence, achieved through virtuous assembly and shared purpose. Ultimately, Masonry and philosophy are presented as sharing the same fundamental object: to worship the grand architect, understand nature, and attain human happiness through virtue.
A shared path towards wisdom and fulfillment. This emphasis on building and action brings us to the essential role of labor as man's function.
The text really elevates labor work to something central to human identity. It's seen as man's great function, his distinction, his privilege. It's what transforms us from mere animals into creative workers, co-creators in a sense.
Labor is a defining human characteristic.
Yes, the earth and its atmosphere are described as man's laboratory, a space for constant work, experimentation, and transformation. It asserts that being a worker in both the physical and intellectual realms is essential for achieving improvement and happiness.
Action and effort are necessary for growth.
Absolutely. Idleness is portrayed negatively as a struggle against time itself, seen almost as an enemy. Doing nothing is presented as fundamentally contrary to the laws of God and nature, laws that ultimately cannot be evaded. It's a strong affirmation of the value of productive, purposeful activity.
Let's consider the broader sweep of history again with the rise and fall of empires. What patterns does the text highlight?
It observes a recurring historical cycle, opulent, luxurious societies eventually sinking, often overcome by societies characterized by poverty, toil, and hardy, resilient people.
The decadence of the rich versus the strength of the striving.
Something like that. It gives examples. Sidon, Tyre, Babylon, Palmyra, Rome, great empires that ultimately fell. It points to the destructive tendencies inherent in unnatural, excessive accumulation of wealth and luxury.
Wealth itself isn't the problem, but its misuse or excessive accumulation.
That seems to be the argument. It suggests that increasing wealth within a society must be accompanied by greater generosity, greater benevolence, a greater sense of shared responsibility if that society wants to avoid repeating the failures of the past. It's a moral call for ethical stewardship alongside prosperity.
A warning against societal decay fueled by unchecked greed. Now, let's delve into the mysteries of antiquity as described in the text. These seem really significant.
They are presented as incredibly important. The term mysteries itself, the text notes, came to signify the highest state of spiritual rapture or enlightenment. In Egypt, the priesthood held immense influence through these mysteries.
How are they presented to people?
They were portrayed as the beginning of a new life, a life of reason and virtue. Initiates were promised agreeable anticipations of death and eternity, insights into nature's secrets, the restoration of the soul to its pure state, and an eventual ascent to celestial mansions, to heavenly realms.
Offering both spiritual knowledge and hope for the afterlife.
Yes, and teachings about future rewards and punishments were prominent. But importantly, they also promised temporal benefits, happiness, and security in this life for those who followed the path.
So, both spiritual and practical incentives.
Definitely. And there was social pressure too. Those who refused initiation were publicly condemned as profane, outside the circle of the virtuous, and considered doomed.
Strong social consequences.
And secrecy was paramount. Betraying the secrets or even mocking the mysteries could be punished by death. The Society of Initiates was intended, at least ideally, to be a community of virtuous individuals freeing themselves from base passions and cultivating social virtues.
An elite group focused on moral and spiritual development.
That was the goal. The original idea that Elysium, the blessed afterlife, was only for initiates stemmed from this. It was reserved for the virtuous, and initiation was the path to virtue.
And what did they teach about the afterlife specifically?
The precise details are uncertain. The text acknowledges. There were scenic representations of Tartarus, punishment, and judgment scenes, but these were likely allegorical. The great central fact, however, was that the mysteries taught the soul's immortality and the consequences of sin.
The fundamental message was accountability and continuity beyond death.
Exactly. The text describes the celebration of the Greater Eleusiniae at the autumnal equinox, a time linked to the burial of seed corn, prompting serious reflection.
A time of symbolic death and rebirth in nature.
Right. It involved initial sorrow and fasting, then a joyful procession with an image of Iacchus, a deity linked to Dionysos and the mysteries. The initiation itself took place in a specific chamber, the pronaos, involving darkness, terrifying sounds, disorientation symbolizing the soul's difficult migration through the confusing sublunar material world.
A symbolic journey through darkness to light.
That seems to be the core symbolism. They borrowed symbols too, like the Orphic egg from Egyptian traditions, where Osiris represented the germ of light within the egg, symbolizing the potential for life emerging from chaos. Hierophants would explain these symbols within the sanctuary. Inscriptions confirm this practice of priests transmitting knowledge to successors and initiates.
A continuous lineage of secret knowledge.
That was the tradition. They taught about the universal cause being divided into active, Osiris heaven, and passive, Isis earth principles worshipped at Samothrace, according to Varro, as the first divinities, male and female, related like soul to body, humidity to dryness. The curates in Crete also honored heaven and earth.
So the mysteries aim to reconnect people with their divine origins.
Yes, to recall man to his divine origin and teach the means of return. Self-knowledge, virtue, piety. This included the soul's ascent after death through the Milky Way, the gate of Capricorn, up through the 7 planetary spheres. Astronomy and the theory of spheres were intrinsically linked to the soul's destiny, taught alongside physics and metaphysics.
A holistic cosmology connecting the heavens, the earth, and the soul.
Very much so. Other mysteries, like those of Atis celebrated at the vernal equinox, also taught about future rewards and used allegorical stories. Atis's flight, concealment, self-mutilation often interpreted as symbolizing the sun cycle. The three-day feast moved from mourning to rejoicing, mirroring the sun's rebirth after winter.
But the meanings could change over time.
Yes, the text notes that as original explanations were lost, ceremonies, though continued, were reinterpreted. The core ancient understanding, however, often involved the soul descending from the highest heaven, the realm of fixed stars, seen as the Elysian fields, its true home.
Descending into matter.
Yes, through a series of degradations or deaths, passing through the planetary spheres and elements. Souls could remain happy if they avoided contamination by the body. But those longing for bodily existence, for earthly life seen as a real death for the soul, were drawn down by the weight of their own thoughts and terrestrial desires.
A kind of spiritual gravity pulling them downwards.
That's a good analogy. As the soul descended, it gradually became invested with increasingly gross, dense matter corresponding to each sphere. The number of deaths equaled the number of spheres traversed.
A progressive entanglement with the material world. Now, how did the movements of the sun and stars fit into this broader picture?
Hugely important. The path of the sun through the zodiac signs became the ecliptic, and its path across the celestial equator marked the equinoxes. Ancients felt fear as the sun moved south towards winter, and great joy at its return after the winter solstice.
The promise of returning light and warmth.
Exactly. The vernal equinox, especially when the sun entered the constellation Taurus, a sign of spring fertility, was a time of great rejoicing, assuring longer days and the planting season.
Connecting celestial events directly to earthly life and survival.
Absolutely. Early Phoenicians, according to Sanchoniathon, worshipped the sun, Beelzebub, king of heaven, and the elements. Sabaism star worship was central in Babylonia. Arab tribes adored the sun, moon, and stars, invoking specific patron stars.
Stars as divine patrons.
Yes. Constellations were vital for agriculture, indicating seasons. Capella and the Pleiades were particularly important markers. The original Roman and Persian New Year began at the vernal equinox, marked by feasts like Naras. Perseus bringing heavenly fire was part of this mythology.
The bull symbol seems significant too.
Very. The Egyptians consecrated the Torah form, bull sheep, scare beetle, to the moon, whose astrological exaltation was in Taurus. Mercury was depicted presenting Isis with a bull-headed helmet.
Complex layers of symbolism, and the zodiac was further divided
into 36 parts called Deans. The 7 planets were apportioned across these, with Mars often seen as opening and closing the series. Each sign had 3 planets assigned, and each decan had a specific god or genius associated with it, 36 in total, with one thought to descend to influence Earth every 10 days.
A highly detailed system of celestial influence.
Incredibly detailed. This division is found on Indian, Persian, and other ancient spheres. The names and characteristics of these decan geniuses and their supposed aid to the sun, moon, and planets were part of this intricate doctrine.
And this knowledge was secret.
Highly secret, entrusted only to initiates with great reserve. These deacons and other intelligences assigned to stars were believed to hold dominion over all aspects of nature, elements, kingdoms, mankind, our actions, virtues, vices, passions, even diseases.
So human life was seen as completely interwoven with the cosmos.
From birth until the soul's eventual reunion with the stars, yes. The universal soul was thought to permeate everything, animating and directing all natural phenomena. Osiris, for instance, was seen as the image of generative power, linked to the vernal equinox and the life-giving Nile waters.
And Osiris and Isis were sun and moon.
Many ancient writers attested to that identification, Diogenes Laertius, Plutarch. Osiris's power was symbolized by an eye over a scepter, the all-seeing eye of the sun. The oracle of Claros called the sun the king of stars and eternal fire. Osiris was invoked as the god acting through the sun to influence the world.
And the myth of Osiris being fragmented and restored.
Isis collecting his fragments, burying them, and consecrating the phallus, symbol of generative power. This was linked to the Pamelia festival near the vernal equinox, symbolizing the union of Osiris, sun, and the moon. Osiris's return from the underworld to aid his son Horus against Typhon, darkness, chaos, was also part of this solar drama, sometimes appearing as a wolf or a horse.
Celestial battle between light and darkness.
Exactly. The moon cycle, gathering light from the sun, was seen as helping to destroy the evil planted by Typhon during winter. The sun's entry into Taurus was marked by the rising of constellations like the Wolf and Centaur, while Orion, the star of Horus, set. The belief was that souls emanating from the divine light were directly affected by these solar revolutions.
It all ties back to the sun's journey and its impact. Now, the text introduces another hugely important symbol, the serpent.
Yes, described as a key symbol, particularly for one of the Masonic degrees discussed. It plays a major role in Hebrew and Gnostic creation stories, often as the entity influencing the fate of souls.
A complex symbol representing both creation and destruction.
It appears that way. It was consecrated in the mysteries of Bacchus and Eleusis. Pluto, god of the underworld, was sometimes depicted overcoming Proserpine in serpent form, or pictured with a serpent as Serapis. It's prominent on Mithraic monuments, often associated with Typhon, the power of darkness.
Also a symbol of royalty.
Yes, the sacred basilisk, or asp, was an ensign of the pharaohs, depicted frequently on Egyptian monuments and tombs. Medusa's head with snakes forms the hyogram of the Ophites, a Gnostic sect who revered the serpent. The serpent entwined with the globe is found almost universally in antiquity.
And often in opposition to the sun god.
Frequently, you see myths of the sun god battling serpent-like monsters, Krishna defeating Kaliya, Apollo slaying Python, Hercules destroying the Lernaean Hydra. Even the infant Hercules battles snakes. It's an ongoing archetypal war. Think St. George and the dragon, Michael battling the serpent.
Representing the struggle against chaos or evil.
That seems to be a core meaning. Eclipses were often explained in the East as a dragon demon attacking the sun or moon. There's the biblical Leviathan, the crooked serpent, pierced by Jehovah. The power of darkness pursues the sun and moon, threatening to engulf them.
A cosmic threat.
Yes. In Indian mythology, the Avatara, and Norse Eddas, a world-destroying serpent vomiting flames is expected at the end of time. The serpent guards the golden fleece in Aries, and the apples of the Hesperides, obstacles for the sun god hero.
But sometimes the relationship is more complex.
Intriguingly, yes, the great destroyer of snakes, Hercules, is sometimes said to have married a northern dragon, fathering the ancestors of the Scythians. The constellation Draco, the dragon, forms a kind of astronomical belt around the northern celestial pole.
So both adversary and perhaps ancestor or cosmic boundary.
It's multifaceted. Piotrs mentions silver serpents in the Temple of Bel in Babylon. Juno sometimes holds a serpent head. The Greeks identified Bel with Beliar, often depicted as a dragon or serpent. A live serpent was reportedly worshipped in Babylon.
A widespread symbol of power and divinity.
And used as a standard by Assyrians, Byzantine emperors, Parthians. Persians represented Ormuzd, good, and Ahriman, evil, as contending serpents. Mithras is also connected. The text trails off there, but the serpent's importance is clear.
Definitely a central, complex symbol. Let's think about how these symbols function in religion and education more generally.
The text makes a fundamental point. All religious expression is ultimately symbolism. Why? Because the true objects of religion, the divine, the ultimate realities, are unseen, ineffable. We can only approach them through symbols.
We need metaphors and images to grasp transcendence.
Exactly. Earliest education, it argues, universally used symbols, adapted to local circumstances and knowledge levels, but just showing a symbol doesn't automatically convey its intended meaning.
Interpretation is needed.
Yes. Philosophers then added verbal explanations, attempting to be more precise, but perhaps less intuitively effective than the visual power of the symbol itself. Over time, narratives and myths grew out of these explanations, and often the original deeper meaning was forgotten or obscured.
The story overtakes the original symbolic intent.
It can happen, and the text pushes further, arguing that even the most refined philosophical definitions, the most abstract terms we use for deity, are still just symbols for ideas that ultimately defy complete expression.
So even absolute being or first cause are symbols.
And they are symbols, yes. Just less sensuous, less pictorial than an image of Osiris or Vishnu, but symbols nonetheless, pointing toward something beyond themselves. When we try to define spirit, we often resort to highly sublimated forms of matter like light or fire, still relying on analogy.
We're always using symbols whether we realize it or not. Let's touch upon the discipline of the secret, or arcani disciplina.
Right, this was the ancient Christian practice mentioned by figures like Chrysostom, Bishop of Constantinople, of being reluctant to speak openly about the holiest mysteries in front of the uninitiated.
Keeping sacred things separate from the everyday.
Yes. There was a practice of formally dismissing the catechumens, those not yet baptized, and closing the church doors before the central parts of the liturgy, like the Eucharist, began. The acclamations and prayers of the initiated were kept secret from the profane.
Maintaining a boundary between the initiated and uninitiated.
Exactly. Palladius recounts an incident where a tumult forced entry into the inner sanctuary. the penetralia, exposing the uninitiated to sights they were forbidden to see, which Chrysostom also apparently mentioned. It underscores how seriously this separation was taken in the early church, mirroring practices in the pagan mysteries.
Interesting parallel. Let's look at trinities and divine emanations across different traditions.
The text points out similar structures in various places. The Chinese concept of Tao, producing one, then two, then three, and from three, all things.
A progression from unity to multiplicity.
Yes. Slavic traditions had Triklav, a three-headed deity. Prussians had a trinity, Perkon, Picolis, Potrempos. Scandinavians had Odin, Frea, and Thor, often grouped together. It suggests a widespread archetypal pattern.
And the Kabbalistic view fits this too.
Definitely. The infinite deity developing into the 10 Sephiroth emanations or rays to create the universe. The very first triad within the highest world, Ezlith, is Kether, the crown, divine will, Hakema, wisdom, the father principle, active power, and Bina, intelligence, the mother principle, passive capacity.
The first three emanations forming a primary trinity.
Exactly. And sometimes Dath, intellection or knowledge, is discussed, representing the unuttered word within the deity. The text identifies this as the origin of the concept of the Trinity. Father, Mother, later often identified with the Holy Spirit, and Son, the word or logos.
A common structure interpreted through different cultural lenses. The text also delves into Gnosticism, right, with Valentinus.
Yes, Valentinus, an influential Gnostic teacher from Alexandria. His system starts with God as the perfect, unknowable abyss, Buthos. From this abyss emanate the divine perfections, producing the intellectual world.
Another emanation model.
Yes. The first manifestations are thought, Enoia, also called grace sige, silence, and then nous, intelligence, the only begotten, paired with truth, aletheia. From these come logos, word, and zoe, life, then anthropos, man, and ecclesia, church, and 12 more eons or divine principles like hope, faith, charity.
A complex celestial hierarchy.
Very. Harmony is disturbed, and nous produces Christos and the Holy Spirit to restore it, forming the eon Jesus. Christos unites with the human Jesus at his baptism. Together with Sophia Achamoth, a fallen aspect of wisdom, they work towards the world's salvation.
And the off-white Gnostic system.
Similar structure, different details. Starts with a supreme being, Buthos, source of light, equivalent to Adam Kadmon. Man is initially made by a lesser creator figure, the Demiurgos, but perfected by the infusion of spirit, Pneuma.
Spirit elevating matter.
Yes. The first emanation is thought, Noithigi, producing spirit Pneuma, also called the mother of the living or wisdom of God. Coexisting is primal matter, waters, darkness, abyss, chaos.
The fundamental duality.
Right. Buthos and thought unite with wisdom, producing Christos and Sophia Achamoth. Sophia falls into chaos and produces Yaldabaoth, the Demiurgos.
The creator of the material world in this system.
Yes, Yaldabaoth produces angels, like Ao, Sabaoth, and creates the world and man in his own image. But Sophia secretly causes the spiritual principle to pass into man, leading to a conflict within humanity between the Demiurgos, representing lower nature, and Sophia, higher spirit, light and darkness.
The inner struggle personified.
Exactly. The reflection of Yaldabaoth on matter becomes the serpent spirit Ophiomorphos, sometimes identified with Satan. Eve has children who are angel-like. Sophia withdraws spiritual light, the world falls prey to evil. Spirit urges the supreme being to send Christos for redemption.
The rescue mission.
Right. Yaldabaoth causes Jesus to be born from a virgin. The celestial savior, Christos, united with wisdom, descends through the angelic realms, hiding his nature, and enters the man Jesus at his baptism. Yaldabaoth, envious, incites the Jews to crucify Jesus. But Christos and wisdom ascend before the crucifixion. Jesus resurrects with an ethereal body, receives true gnosis, knowledge from wisdom, teaches his apostles the secrets, and ascends to Yaldabaoth's realm, sits at his right hand, gathering souls.
A very intricate and dramatic cosmology. Let's return to the broader nature of man and truth.
The text offers a perspective on early humanity, initially animalistic until a divine spark penetrating the brain created the immortal soul. This establishes man's threefold nature.
Threefold nature.
Yes. The physical, seeing, hearing, feeling, the intellectual, thinking, reasoning, and the spiritual, emotional, loving, seeking harmony with the universe. But over time, this primitive awareness of truth faded, leading man to question his origin and destiny.
The existential questions emerge.
Exactly. The soul turns inward, questioning itself. Is it just matter? Spirit within matter, an individual essence, part of a great first principle. This introspection, as we discussed earlier, led to various philosophical errors, materialism on one hand, abstract idealism on the other.
The ongoing search for self-understanding. Now let's look at the figure of Dionysos and nature.
Dionysos, or Dionysus, is presented as the great nature god of the Greeks, parallel to Amun in Egypt. The popular legend makes him a Theban hero, son of Zeus, persecuted by Hero, similar patterns to Hercules' story.
But different in emphasis.
Yes, while Hercules became more hero than god, Dionysus retained his divine character, especially as Iacchus, the presiding genius of the Eleusinian mysteries. He personified the sun, particularly the sun entering Taurus, hence depicted with ox hoofs, bringing life back after winter, leading the cosmic dance of stars, changing with the seasons.
The god embodying natural cycles.
Exactly. Invoked as Purigenes, born of fire lightning, Zagreus, the mighty hunter, perhaps ready-faced. The mysteries taught divine unity, with Dionysos representing the totality of nature, the animating moisture, the life force working in darkness, or the light and change that brings forth diversity.
Different aspects depending on the context.
Yes. He had various names across the Aegean, Buttes, Dardanus, and Crete, Iasiasus. His orgiastic worship involved revealing symbols connected to these natural forces. He was the sun, liberating the elements. Spiritual contemplation in his mysteries was linked to the zodiac as the pathway of spirits. His second birth symbolized man's spiritual regeneration.
Rebirth and transformation.
Right. He was the leader of the muses, source of inspiration. His rule didn't demand unnatural self-denial. It commemorated a mythical golden age of eternal spring. Like Osiris, he was the liberator, freeing the soul, guiding it after death.
A guide for the soul's journey.
Yes. All individual souls were seen as parts of the universal soul, personified as Dionysos, who leads the wandering spirit back home through purification. His death and descent to the shades was the great secret revealed in the mysteries. He was the immortal lover of Psyche, the soul, the divine influence calling the world into being and restoring the soul to heaven.
A powerful, multifaceted deity representing nature's cycles and the soul's journey. How does the text contrast this ancient view with modern science?
It highlights this shift in perspective. The modern view, it suggests, sees the vast universe more as a machine governed by mechanical laws, not necessarily instinct with a soul. We understand immense distances, dimensions, gravity, orbits. We analyze the physical nature of planets and stars.
A more mechanistic, less enchanted view.
Perhaps. It contrasts this with the ancient view of a living universe filled with mysterious forces, energies that were either in sympathy with or hostile to humanity. For ancients, everything was potentially mystery, miracle. Stars spoke to human hearts, planets and stars were personified, worshipped.
A much more personal relationship with the cosmos.
Yes. They believed celestial bodies moved voluntarily, not just mechanically. Astronomy was paramount, not just for navigation, but for understanding destiny. Structures like the pyramids and the Tower of Bel served astronomical and religious purposes. The text reflects on the ancient childlike simplicity in worshiping light and believing the intricate mythologies they created.
A different way of experiencing the universe. Let's touch upon those ancient accounts of creation again briefly.
One account describes God creating guardians for the worlds from water, forming a human-like being whose senses connect to elements: speech, fire, breath, air, sight, sun, hearing, space. The universal soul ponders how this body can exist without it, then penetrates man through the cranium, bringing consciousness.
A story of divine infusion into matter.
Yes. The core truths highlighted are God as infinite and eternal soul spirit, matter created by God's thought, man created similarly, then infused with a spark of God's own essence, becoming a living spirit. The Vedic account is also summarized. A single self-existing God desires manifestation, creates matter, breathes on the waters, forming the cosmic egg, heaven and earth. Common themes of divine origin and creation through thought or breath.
Similar underlying principles across cultures. Now, how does the text define the nature of atheism in God?
It defines the real atheist not just as someone who denies God's existence, but someone who denies God's essential qualities, denying a self-conscious providence or any inherent plan or purpose in the universe's design.
Denying meaning and purpose in the cosmos.
Exactly. Such a person, the text argues, must either hold that matter is eternal and self-originated, which is itself a profound mystery, or that it somehow spontaneously generated itself without cause, which the text finds absurd, or admit it was created by some kind of intelligence or cause, which essentially admits a God.
A philosophical argument against pure randomness.
Yes. It questions the plausibility of eternal, unthinking, will-less matter spontaneously organizing itself into the intricate, purposeful forms we see in nature without any underlying plan. The very words plan, purpose, providence, it argues, derive their meaning from the observable order of the universe.
The order points towards an orderer. Let's revisit the doctrine of universal soul.
This ancient doctrine held that the heavens, the spheres, the stars, they all possess living souls, which are parts of one great overarching universal soul. Figures like the Sabaeans, Timaeus, Plato, Speusippus held this view.
A cosmos alive with spirit.
Yes, the idea progressed. The universe has a soul, therefore an intelligent soul must be the source of all intelligence. Each particular soul of a star, a planet, a person is the vehicle for its attached intelligence. A universal soul implies a universal intelligence, the source of all particular ones.
A hierarchy of intelligence stemming from a universal source.
Right. Agents of nature, forces, were thought to receive intelligence by participating in this universal soul. The divine soul, acting as the primary cause, produced intelligence, making heaven, stars, elements seats of divine intelligences. Each portion of the great soul became a partial intelligence, becoming more active and conscious as it became less entangled with gross matter. Old nature worshippers, theologians, astrologers, poets, many shared this vision of an ensouled cosmos.
A deeply interconnected and intelligent universe. Let's look at Anaxagoras again, specifically his concept of mind, nous, as the moving force.
Anaxagoras, while believing in fundamental particles, uniquely asserted that mind nous was the distinct moving force that organized them. He acknowledged the limits of illustrating something non-material, but emphasized mind's different character and effect compared to matter.
So mind is fundamentally different from matter.
Absolutely. For Anaxagoras, mind was not matter, nor just a force joined with it. It was independent, unique, pure, unmixed. It was the source of all motion, separation, bringing order out of initial chaos, and cognition, understanding.
The principle of order and awareness.
Yes, mind possessed supreme empire over everything, including the great cosmic vortex. It was the most penetrating and powerful force, mixing with things without being mixed itself, exercising universal control and cognition, encompassing both necessity, natural law, and individual thought. It's essentially self-conscious thought extended to the universe, elevated to a supreme external mind.
A universal ordering intelligence. Now let's compare this with Aristotle's first cause.
Aristotle's first cause, as we touched on, is the unmoved mover, the ultimate source of all motion, which is itself unmoved. Actuality act is primary, and the universe is eternal, perpetually moved by this cause. Its unity stems from its immateriality, avoiding an infinite regress of movers.
The buck stops here, so to speak.
Exactly. This first cause is necessary, unchangeable, the source of all movement. Its eternal necessary relations are what make a science of being possible. Initially, Aristotle's concept seemed close to a personal god, an individuality of intelligence reviving in Anaxagoras' nous, maybe akin to the poet's Uranus or Zeus.
But it evolved.
It did. Later, the personality aspect receded. Real and ideal blend. Moral action, objective thought, thinking about something external, and material body are excluded from the divine action. Efficient causes resolve into the final cause, the ultimate goal or purpose, which is the immobility of pure thought or form.
God becomes the ultimate purpose, not just the initial force.
Yes, God is formal, efficient, and final cause, the one form comprising all forms, the goal towards which the entire universe longs. Moving the world as a beloved object moves the lover.
A desire-driven cosmos.
In a sense, he is the internal, self-realized final cause with no end beyond himself, not a moral agent acting in the world, but pure self-contemplative thought, the highest, most perfect energy of life. This perpetual pleasure contrasts with our fleeting experiences.
Why no external action?
Because seeking external gratification would imply imperfection, dependency. Man's good lies partly outside himself. God's does not. The eternal act producing the world is the eternal desire of good. Absolute thought contemplates absolute good. Nature is movement. Thought is repose. So divine thought becomes the thinking of thought, pure self-awareness.
A perfect self-contained thought.
But the text notes the paradox. Doesn't thought require an object? Doesn't activity imply more than just self-contemplation? It's a profound, but perhaps ultimately self-limiting concept.
It raises as many questions as it answers. This deep dive into metaphysics leads to a warning in the text about the idolatry of notions.
Right, the danger of philosophy becoming too abstract, treating mere thoughts and concepts as if they were ultimate truths. This creates an idolatry of notions.
Worshipping ideas instead of reality.
Essentially, seeing these notions as phantoms of real objects, or worse, as parts of some pre-existent divine thought, creating a new mythology based on abstractions. Theories formed and defended uncritically become philosophy's false gods or idols.
Mental idols.
Exactly. The Greek word eidolon means image or phantom. So, creating a false mental picture of God, based purely on abstract reasoning detached from experience or revelation, is a form of idolatry. Early philosophy's attempt at grand, unifying solutions often required sweeping, unproven assumptions.
Overreaching with reason.
Perhaps. Poetry personified deity as human. Philosophy sometimes bowed to the supposed reflection of the divine in the philosopher's own mind. Effectively deifying the self, nature got enslaved to common notions, which were often just slaves to words and definitions. A caution against intellectual hubris.
A call for humility in philosophizing. Let's look now at the ineffable name and divine principles.
This text provides examples of pronouns for God in ancient Semitic languages, simply he and she, highlighting simplicity. It explains that the ineffable name, like the Hebrew tetragrammaton, YHWH, embodies the philosophical idea of deity as pure being, ENS, to on, absolute existence, substance, in Spinoza's sense.
The ground of all reality.
Yes, this being is eternal, uncreated, contrasted with that which becomes nature, the soul of nature, which is created or emanated. But the name also embodies the male and female principles in their deepest original sense.
Male and female within the Godhead.
Yes, the idea that God originally comprehended all principles within the divine unity. Matter wasn't coexistent or independent. It was God's thought manifested outwardly as the universe. The generative power or spirit, often symbolized as male, and productive capacity or matter, often symbolized as female, were originally one in God. God was, is, and shall be all, the reality in whom all else subsists.
An all-encompassing unified source. This leads to the argument for God as real and determinate. How does the text make this case?
It argues, perhaps counterintuitively, that the very imperfection of the world points to the perfection of its ultimate cause. God isn't just a logical abstraction, but a true living being.
How does our own consciousness factor in?
Our awareness of ourselves as existing beings, but also as limited beings, naturally leads us to conceive of an unlimited principle of our being, an infinite being. Our own substantial attributes, like consciousness, will, reason, require an infinite cause possessing those attributes perfectly.
Our finitude points to the infinite.
Exactly. Therefore, God is presented as a real, determinate, moral person, analogous to ourselves in possessing consciousness and morality, but infinitely perfect. And importantly, God is knowable primarily through studying our own souls, our own nature, without needing external hypotheses. Introspection as a path to the divine.
Looking within to understand the ultimate, this connects directly to love of truth and union with God.
Yes, the text argues that loving truth, justice, and spiritual nobility is, in essence, loving God manifested in those forms. The goal is to unite these separate loves into a total integrated piety or reverence.
Seeing the divine in the highest values.
Right. We should strive to feel our own existence as taking place within God's vast forces and consciousness. When we attain truth in study, we confront God's thought. When we learn what is right, we learn God's will. When we experience disinterested love, we partake of God's own feeling.
Aligning our inner life with the divine.
Exactly. Reverencing the forces of the cosmos becomes reverencing the infinite God. This leads to being mindful of God's mind through reason, God's conscience through our own moral sense, and God's sentiments through love and compassion, recognizing our existence within God's infinite being, a profound sense of unity.
A very integrated view of spirituality. Let's tackle the challenging topic of the necessity of creation and suffering. Why must there be creation and why suffering?
The text argues that it's inherent to the nature of an infinite being to create, to preserve the finite, and to communicate its own nature. Finite things require the infinite as their basis to exist, and conversely, the infinite as creator requires something to create.
A necessary relationship between creator and creation.
Yes, God is the necessary logical condition of the world, and the world is the necessary logical consequence of God. It is God's infinite perfection to create, preserve, and bless.
Creation as an expression of divine perfection.
Right, and it notes that much of metaphysics, from Aristotle to Hegel, concludes that if creation is inherent to God's nature and God cannot be conceived alone, then creation must, in some sense, be coexistent with God, leading back to that idea of God as the soul of the universe.
An eternal process of creation.
Conceptually, yes, those specific created things have beginnings. The text then connects this to human purpose. Our end is happiness achieved through virtue. Therefore, virtue in this world is the condition for happiness in the next.
And suffering's role.
Suffering is presented as the necessary condition for developing virtue in this world. Without suffering, hardship, loss, There would be no occasion for resignation, humanity, compassion, self-sacrifice, devotion, heroic virtues, sublime morality.
We need challenges to grow stronger, morally speaking.
That's the argument. We are subject to suffering because we are sensible beings and because we ought to be virtuous. Physical evils provide the opportunities to cultivate resignation and courage. They are willed by God, the text suggests, precisely because they make the world perfectly adapted to achieving man's ultimate destiny, moral and spiritual growth.
Finding purpose even in pain. The text includes some hymns to the divine, right?
Yes, short, powerful excerpts like Vedic hymns asking, "Who is the God?" Contemplating the firmament, the rising sun, the life-giving waters and clouds. They express that fundamental human response of awe and questioning when faced with the power and mystery of nature and existence.
Poetry capturing that sense of wonder. Let's explore the word of God and divine light.
Indian philosophy, the text notes, viewed the word logos of God as universal, invisible light, which manifests visibly in the sun, moon, and stars. Philo described this logos as the universal light, losing some purity as it descends into the sensible material world.
Light as a metaphor for divine expression.
A very common and powerful one. The Kabbalah has a similar idea. Only a limited portion of the infinite light, Ein Sof Aur, flowed into the primordial void, the Simsum, prepared for creation. The Sephiroth, emanating from deity, were rays of this divine splendor.
Controlled emanations of light forming reality. The text goes deeper into Kabbalistic emanations, doesn't it?
Yes, describing the repeated descent of the letter Yod, representing a point of divine energy, into the vacated space to further lessen and structure the light. From the remaining light, the Hiru, splendor, is constituted. The female letter, he is seen as communicating this light.
A complex interplay of divine forces and letters.
Very symbolic. Light is emitted within this sphere of splendor, forming the Corona Summa, the supreme crown Kether. This first Sephira contains all the other numerations, Sephiroth potentially, in an indistinguishable state, like the four elements existing potentially within a human being before they manifest distinctly. This crown is called the cause of causes, the ancients of the ancients.
The primal point from which all else unfolds. Let's look at Kabbalistic equilibrium in the Sephirothic tree visually.
The Kabbalah emphasizes equilibrium, a balance between opposing principles, often symbolized as male and female forces or pillars like mercy and severity. Holding this balance is the supreme will or absolute reason above them. This equilibrium is seen as the foundation of all true religion and science.
Balance is a fundamental cosmic principle.
Exactly. The Sephiroth are often arranged in a diagram called the Sephirothic tree, typically showing a triple triangle and a circle. The ternary, three principles, is explained by this balance, multiplied by itself in further emanations.
Can you list the Sephiroth as presented in the tree diagram?
Sure. At the top is Kether, crown well. Below it, forming the first triangle, are Hakima, wisdom, active potency, father on the right, and Bina, intelligence, passive capacity, mother on the left. Sometimes Dath, knowledge, intellection, is shown below them in the center, linking them. Then comes the second triangle. Gedula or cheese, benignity, mercy on the right, Gebra, severity, justice on the left, balanced by Tiferet, beauty, harmony in the center. The third triangle, Netzach, victory, permanency on the right, Hud, glory, majesty on the left, balanced by Yesod, foundation, stability in the center. Finally, at the bottom, integrating all, is Malakoth, kingdom, dominion, realization.
A detailed map of divine attributes and their relationships. Now let's turn to Hermetic principles again.
The text quotes instructions attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, foundational for alchemy. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, gently and with great industry.
A process of refinement and purification.
Yes. It ascends from earth to heaven and descends again to earth, and receives the force of things superior and inferior. By doing this, one possesses the glory of the whole world, and obscurity is dispelled.
Uniting heaven and earth within oneself.
That's the symbolic interpretation. This force is described as overcoming the subtle and penetrating the solid. So the world was created, it concludes. Alchemy masters, the text explains, use this kind of symbolic language intentionally, partly to conceal knowledge from the unworthy, repel the profane, partly to be understood by adepts through analogy, all governed by Hermes' core dogma of correspondence, as above, so below.
A coded language for initiates. This leads directly to the philosophical stone in alchemy. What is the stone, according to this text?
It's presented as the true salt of the philosophers, one of the three essential components of Azoth, the universal agent, symbolically represented as a cubical stone. More profoundly, it's the foundation of absolute philosophy, supreme reason itself. Achieving this inner certainty, this balanced reason, is seen as necessary before attempting any physical transmutation, metallic work.
So inner transformation precedes outer transformation.
That's the key. It requires separating certainties from mere beliefs, distinguishing science, what is known through reason and experience, from faith, resting on sentiment and a different kind of reason. We often don't truly know what we believe, nor fully believe what we know. Science deals with the known and definite, faith with the unknown and indefinite.
A call for intellectual clarity.
Yes. Then it describes the alchemical principles: mercury, philosophical water spirit; sulfur, fire soul; and salt, earth body, arising from the interplay of the four elements' qualities. It details their symbolic actions on the sun: gold or perfection, dissolving, sublimating, coloring, fixing, all taking place within air, the medium.
A complex symbolic chemistry.
Indeed. From these three principles arise the four grand elements of the alchemists: mercury, related to elemental water; sulfur, oil, air; salt, fire; and glass, earth. Some are volatile, some fixed. Fire acts to melt and refine them. Each grand element is itself composed of the four simple elements, with glass, pure earth, being the final, most stable substance to be separated out in the great work, magnum opus.
A journey towards purity and stability. Let's now consider a specific historical group often linked to these ideas, the Templars and their beliefs. How does the text approach them?
It presents a perspective, framed as if from an enemy trying to explain the papal hostility towards the order, advising careful separation of fact from conjecture.
Acknowledging the controversy surrounding them.
Yes, it introduces a political idea. Unchecked power, like religious monarchies, proves fatal, while republics perish from conflicting liberties without enforced duty. The Christian hierophants, in this view, aim to create a society, the Templars being an attempt, bound by vows of abnegation, protected by rules, recruited by initiation, to be sole keepers of religious social secrets, guiding kings and popes without being corrupted.
An ambitious goal of wielding influence without being worldly.
Governing worldly grandeurs without being of this world, as the text puts it. It dismisses as absurd the accusations that educated Templar leaders literally worshipped an idol called Baphomet or revered Muhammad.
Suggesting these were misinterpretations or slander.
Exactly. Their symbolism, it argues, which actually predated them, concealed potentially dangerous truths and was misunderstood by outsiders, the profane, as pantheistic or idolatrous. Aaron's golden calf is given as an example of how symbols meaningful to the wise become idols to the ignorant.
The danger of literal interpretation by the uninitiated.
Precisely. The true beliefs of the Templar chiefs, the text hints, are preserved or reflected in the high degrees of Freemasonry, understood only by adepts.
Hidden knowledge again.
Yes. The blue degrees, the first three, are described as the outer court or portico, with interpretations intentionally simplified or even misleading. True explanations are reserved for adepts, princes of masonry. The royal art, governance, and sacerdotal art, priesthood, spiritual leadership, were carefully hidden, leaving enigmas unsolved for most.
A deliberate veiling of inner truths.
The text even suggests it's sufficient for most Masons to believe everything is contained in the blue degrees, and attempts to undeceive them are futile and violate obligations. Masonry itself is called the veritable Sphinx, buried by time, its secrets largely hidden.
A very esoteric view of Masonic history and the Templar connection. Let's return to fundamental ethics with the moral law and ideal justice.
The text asserts that the moral law, the sense of justice, is learnable in two ways: through experience and observation of the world, and through our innate conscience.
Both external learning and internal guidance.
Yes, man possesses an ideal of conduct, a sense of how things should be, which is often higher than his actual historical behavior. We tend, however, to justify our own injustices by pleading necessity.
The gap between our ideals and our actions.
Right. But it also cautions against pushing this ideality too far. Our personal ideal of right and wrong might actually exceed God's justice as it plays out in the complex governance of the world.
How so? What are the examples?
We might detest the rapacity we see in nature, predator-prey relationships, or the seeming injustice of inherited diseases. We might expect an omnipotent God to simply prevent all pain, poverty, servitude.
Our human sense of fairness applied to the cosmos.
Yes. The text suggests this moral sense, even if its ideals seem higher than cosmic reality, is given for wise purposes. It's proof of the loftiness of human nature. We should strive towards this ideal, but always within the context of the created relations and circumstances we find ourselves in. Practical idealism.
Strive for the best, but be grounded in reality. How does it distinguish real versus ideal justice in practice?
It clarifies that instances where, say, an individual suffers for the safety of the many, or one group's interest is postponed for a clearly superior common good, these might violate our ideal rules of fairness, but aren't necessarily departures from real, practical justice within a complex system.
Difficult trade-offs are sometimes necessary.
It seems to acknowledge that possibility. However, it emphatically states that every departure from real, practical justice inevitably results in loss for the unjust party, even if it goes unreported or seems successful in the short term.
Injustice always has a cost.
Always, public or private, it brings consequences. We naturally detest the selfish, grasping, inhuman, fraudulent, ungenerous, cruel. This innate reaction reflects a deeper truth about justice.
Our conscience reflects a universal law. This leads to the final points on divine justice and truthfulness.
The text asserts that a sentence against all injustice is written by God into the fabric of human nature and the universe itself. It reflects the nature of the infinite God.
Justice is woven into reality.
Yes, justice to oneself means being faithful to one's faculties, trusting one's convictions. Justice to others means living in obedience to their rights and dignity. It declares that no wrong is ever truly successful. The gain of injustice is loss, its pleasure is suffering.
The paradox of wrongdoing.
Exactly. The apparent prosperity of iniquity is described as its ultimate defeat. There will be a day of reckoning for nations and individuals. The knave deceives himself most of all. The miser starves his own soul while hoarding wealth.
Inner consequences, even if outer ones are delayed.
Right. Escaping a duty means avoiding a potential gain or growth. Outward judgment may fail. Inward judgment, the judgment of consequences, never does. Trying to love or do wrong is like trying to eat stones, futile and self-damaging. Justice follows swiftly, inevitably.
An inescapable moral order.
That's the strong conclusion. No one can escape justice, which is depicted almost as God's angel, bringing both counsel and sustenance, guidance and consequence. A final affirmation of moral order.
And finally, the text includes a very extensive index, doesn't it? Just to give listeners a sense of the scope.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly detailed. It references hundreds, maybe thousands of terms, concepts, figures. You find entries on everything from heathen mysteries, the discipline of the secret, discords, divine attributes, divine dynasties, dog star, dogma, doctrines of countless groups.
Well, the real encyclopedic range.
Completely. It covers historical figures like Macrobius, Maimonides, Muhammad, philosophical concepts like macrocosmos, magnum opus, mythological figures like Osiris, Isis, Uranus, symbolic elements like the ox, python, the quadrature of the circle, alchemical terms, Gnostic concepts. The list is vast. It truly shows the immense breadth of learning Pike drew upon, or at least referenced, in compiling Morals and Dogma. It's a map to a whole world of interconnected ideas.
Well, that was an incredibly rich and complex journey through the ideas presented in Morals and Dogma. We've touched on so much from Masonic symbolism and ancient spiritual paths to deep philosophical questions and fundamental moral principles.
It really covers a vast territory. And as you can see, exploring these historical threads and symbolic layers, it offers so many potential insights, doesn't it? Insights into ourselves, into the world, which I know is something you, the listener, are interested in gaining.
Absolutely. And it's clear, isn't it, that this text doesn't just give simple answers. It presents a multitude, a real tapestry of perspectives, interpretations.
Often conflicting ones, even.
Yeah, which
But
really invites you, encourages you, the listener, to engage critically, to think for yourself, to continue exploring these fascinating and sometimes challenging topics.
which brings us maybe to a final thought to leave you with. Considering how enduring these symbols are, the ladder, the serpent, the light, and how these themes of ascent, struggle, hidden knowledge keep recurring across so many different traditions, what does that tell us? What are those fundamental human questions that seem to drive this persistent, age-old search for meaning and understanding?
That's definitely something profound to mull over. We really encourage you to delve further into these ideas if they sparked your interest, and to consider what relevance this kind of ancient wisdom, this deep symbolism, might still hold for us in our very modern world.